Alright, Lazy Daisy. These are super simple, super cute little flowers that will fill up a design really quickly without a ton of effort. Like, that takes some effort. This, super easy. Okay. So, you'll generally for a Lazy Daisy, you'll have 5 lines with not much else, and you're looking at that going, what am I supposed to do with that? Sometimes you'll have like a starburst, but we'll start with this one. So my way of doing a Lazy Daisy is you come up on the bottom of one line on one side, and then you go back down just on the other side of the line. But do not pull your thread all the way through. Leave this bit loose. And then come up at the very top of that one. Loop that thread over your needle and then pull. And then put a little tack stitch down there, real close. Voila. Okay, now a lot of times you'll see these, they'll be like super tiny, so when you do those stitches, it all like comes together and looks like a flower, sort of. And a lot of times they'll actually start in the center, but I don't draw them out that way because I like to fill the insides of the petals with either the same color or a complementing color, and then put a couple of French knots, which we haven't gone over yet, but put a couple of French knots in the center to make it look more like a flower. So let's get a coordinating color on the needle. We're doing 3 strands, so we're going to split this thread. Nice and slow, let it unwind as you go. Okay, now sometimes you can come straight up through the middle, but this is kind of a big center, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that with something else, a yellow or orange or something. I'm going to come at the edge of the leaf, up through the bottom, and then right up to the top. And sometimes the gap will be a little bit big and you'll have to do that twice, but it's fine. And I wouldn't normally use like this obnoxious blue for these, but I'm trying to use colors that you can see well. Go ahead and do this one. So this one's a little bit bigger, so I'll spread these out a little bit more. Try to. And then we can do a couple of lines on the inside with the brighter blue. So then basically what you've ended up with is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 stitches, and you've got a whole little flower. Oops, I'm going to make that one very wide. Let's see if I can go back through that hole. Oh no! Let's try that again. That's a little better. With a little bit of practice, you will get really fast at these because they are super easy. Alright, so this is going to be one that takes a couple of stitches. I'm not going to bring these two outside ones up to the very top. Almost, but not quite. Inside ones I'll bring up to the top. Ow! Okay, that's something else. Get used to stabbing yourself because it is going to happen. And the larger needles that I send with my kits are quite sharp. So I send along pretty heavy duty needles. So this one should only need 2. Probably could do with just 1, but we'll do 2. So you get the idea of the lazy daisy now. It's really easy, really cute. And once you learn how to do the French knot, now of course if you don't like the French knot, you could put a bead in the center, you could do a satin stitch of yellow, especially in something as big as these ones. Like that's plenty of room to do a satin stitch. I just really, really like the French knot. I really like the 3-dimensional look of the French knot, so that's why I use it a lot. And once you get the hang of that one, it'll fill in the center like that. Alright, there you go. Easy little daisy. And then in the big picture, when you've got a lot of floral going on, like putting these in, dotting them in, looks really, really cute. and it helps to fill in like little areas that you don't have room for like a big complicated flower. You just put some lazy daisies in there and you're all set. This is what we call a rosette. I didn't iron around it so you can still see the outline, but I'm going to show you how to make this pretty flower right up here. But first we're going to go over appliques. So some of my kits come with appliques. These are already ironed on, but they're not permanent. Like, I would not trust that. It might stay forever, but I wouldn't trust it. And in the spirit of embroidering everything, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to tack those down. Super easy, and I normally wouldn't send a black thread to go over something like that. I'd send a tan or, you know, a cream color or a brown. But so that you guys can see it, I'm going to go ahead and use black thread. So you've already learned how to separate your threads, hopefully. And I'm going to go ahead and use 2 strands. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start in the middle somewhere. And we're going to come up on the very edge of the embroidery, but not on the very edge of the applique, but not through the applique. Because if you start by pushing up through the applique, you'll loosen it. So we're going to come up through on the very edge of the applique and then go back down into the applique. You can either do this straight on or do it at an angle, whatever you feel like. And then a little bit of ways, you do another stitch. And these are just tiny stitches that are going to hold this down. And then when you get to a corner, you want to make sure you trap your corners under the thread, because those will be the things that will lift off, if anything. Alright, so you've got a couple stitches and you'll continue all the way around your applique like that. Do that first, and then when you've done that, you come back and just use your same holes that you already went through. Well, I probably don't. Yeah, I could. And you're going to stitch around the outside. So it ends up looking like a blanket stitch, but it's not really a blanket stitch because you're not going around the edge of a fabric. Okay, so what you'll end up with is the little stitches that go in and then the outline all the way around. I'm not going to do the whole thing because that's just time consuming. Now, some of my appliques are 2 pieces, like this is 2 pieces. And you wouldn't do the blanket stitch on both of these. I mean, you could, or you could just do a simple, like, back stitch. Not a back stitch, like a whip stitch, I guess they call it. So you're just tacking down both edges at the same time. Up through one, down through the other. But you want to make sure that you've already gone through and tacked down all your edges before you do this. And then you just continue straight across. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but that's 2 separate pieces that are appliqued on there. So you continue like that. Alright, so we finished up the applique. Now I want to point out that whenever you're doing a kit with an applique, you always want to do the applique first so that your edges don't get rubbed and fray while you're working on the other stuff. But we're done with that. Kind of sloppy, but it's on there. Now we're going to work on the French knot, which is one of my favorite stitches. I love the way it looks, but it's sort of a pain in the butt sometimes. So that's what the inside of this flower is made of. We're going to do a couple little French knots around these vines so you can kind of see what's going on, and then we'll start filling in the center. So just like everything else, you're going to come up through the bottom. You've got your knot on the back. And then you're going to hold this, take it and wrap it around your needle a couple of times. And then you're going to go back down really close to where you came up. And that's a French knot.
Just how many times have you done this stuff?
The procedure is experimental. Success is yet.
So they're good for tiny little flowers. And then I also like to put them in bunches
I was told the last crucial piece of the puzzle exists in this lab.
to make like clusters, sort of like wisteria or little budding flowers.
That's why you've come here.
So tell me, how do you change these things? How do you
Now I find myself doing 3 wraps around the needle, but you can do 1 or 2. Let's do 1. The different wraps are going to change the size of your little curl.
Well, if you want your fiance back, then you're gonna have to find something to do.
Let's do 2, 1, 2. And this one we'll do 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I generally find myself just doing 3. I don't know why. It's like a muscle memory thing. It's what I do. Alright, so we got the idea. So now we're ready to do our center of our rosette. So I generally like to work from the outside in so that I know I've got that outside line. So up through the back, wrap your needle around it, back down close to where you started. Alright, and then once you go all the way around the circle, you're just going to go in the inside and just keep filling it in until it's all filled in. Now we have to do the frame. of the rosette, which is these lines right here. And generally, when I write rosettes in my patterns, they're 2 colors. So you want to do your frame with the lightest color of the 2. So we're mixing 2 purples today, so I'm going to use the lavender. And when you have multiple rosettes, you want to do each frame separately, because when you're weaving this, it's going to pull on the frame, and you don't want it to pull all of it to one rosette and this be super tight when you go to work on that one. So do each flower separately, tie it off in a knot, and then work on your others. So you want to make sure to tuck your frame underneath your French knots. There you go. 5 simple long stitches. Tie it off on the back, and then you can thread your needle for your rosette. Now you'll notice that anything that's close to this rosette or that should be part of it, I've stitched first, because I want to make sure that this goes up underneath of it, because these stitches are super loose. You might see underneath of it. So anything like the stem or a leaf or anything that goes around it, you stitch that first, and then carry on from there. Alright, so we're ready to get started on the rosette part. Like I said, my patterns generally call for 2 colors. So, usually, not always, but usually, this is how it works. So you're going to separate your strands. Like so. Generally, it's 3 strands of each color. Sometimes it's 2, depending on the size of the rosette. Separate your strands. Set 1/2 aside. You're going to use that next. When you cut your thread, you want to make sure that each color is the same length, so you don't end up short on one color as you're working your rosette. So you're going to get your thread wet. Flatten it out a little bit and then snip it flat. And hopefully that will help you get it into your needle. Because the needle threaders do not like to pull 6 strands through the eye. There we go. Alright. So, and you'll notice that mine is extra long because you burn through this thread really fast. So if you can work with an extra long strand, I recommend doing that. Every stitcher has their own way of doing their rosettes. I start mine by going underneath all of them first. So what we're going to want to do is up under your French knots, come in between 2 of your frames, pull it through, and then you're going to go underneath all of the frames one time. Kind of making sure they tuck up underneath. Just make sure you don't end up with white gaps between your French knots and your petals. And then you start going over, under, over, under. So, and under that one, we'll go over, under. Don't pull it too tight. You'll get around to pulling it later. Under, over, that. Under, and because there is an odd number of frames, as long as you keep going over, under, you'll end up with a pattern. So that one was under, now it's going to be over. Go under that next one. It's hard to do on an easel. Need a little extra thread. And as you're working, just shape it with your fingers. You don't want to pull them too tight. Keep them in a kind of circular pattern. Alright, so you get the idea. Let's speed it up a little bit. Alright, now when you've gotten to the end, and of course the frame's not full yet, but you're going to need more than one go. So when you've gotten to the end, you want to make sure you're at a point where you're going over. And then just stick it back down into the thread, into the fabric, and tuck it in on the back. Okay, so you got your rosette pretty much filled in. Sometimes you'll have these little pieces sticking out from the frame, or not. That looks pretty good actually. So what you want to do is, if you have the little bit sticking out from the frame. Just put a small or medium stitch over top of it to cover it up. And that also helps to lock everything in place. Tuck it under there. There you go. Alright, so ideally, when you're doing these with one of my kits, after you do the frame, which is the 5 long stitches that lead to the outside, you want to pull this off the hoop and iron it. At that point, I always write my patterns to do the rosettes last because I don't want to iron this. It's 3-dimensional and I don't want to flatten it with an iron. So I always do the rosettes and the 3-dimensional items last, so that you can pull it off the frame, iron it to get rid of your little lines, which we didn't fill that leaf in. Get rid of your little lines, and then put it back on the frame, finish your rosettes and any other 3D things you have. Some have beads, some have felt flowers or whatever, and then you're done. Alright, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and I will do the best I can to answer them. Until next time, this is MJ. Have a rockin' day.